Hello and welcome back to Modern World History. And in this video, we're going to continue to talk about the transition to the New World. We're going to change our focus to yet another region. And in this one, we're going to actually look at two regions in this video. And even though they're not connected, I'm going to go ahead and just cover them both in one fell swoop. And that is, we're going to start off with South Africa's apartheid, and then we're going to move on to the unrest in the Balkans. You know, the Balkans in the 1990s. And so this is where we're going to go in this video. So South Africa was a Dutch colony in the southern tip of Africa, which South Africa makes a lot of sense, and later on became under British control. And so there's a European colonial legacy here in South Africa. Well, I guess that those from European descent in the area made up a very small, made up a minority, a large minority of the population. But whites in South Africa were actually the minority, and blacks were the majority. And so the racial policy of apartheid is very, very similar to Jim Crow in the United States South. One of the big difference here, though, is, like I just said, in the U.S. South, there was still a majority of whites and a minority of blacks. But nevertheless, it's still very much a racial policy that caused huge problems in the area, and still today they're still picking up the pieces largely of that. And so, the apartheid is a word that means separation of races. You can see this word apart in there. So it's a policy of segregation. You've got these various laws here, and what I did was I just took this out of a PowerPoint. But what it does is it kind of simplifies and shows a summary of some of the apartheid laws. And you can take a look at it a little bit closer. I am going to read a few of them to you. If you were of a racially, a racial group that was considered a minority in terms of significance, which in most cases were blacks, you had to carry an ID, which stated which racial group you belonged to. Now, whites didn't have to do that. There were also different rules for different groups. All right, you couldn't. You had to live with people of the same race. You could not mix at all. So I don't know if you guys have ever listened to any of the videos by Trevor. I'm gonna misspell his name. Trevor Noah, the guy who does the Daily Show. And he's a stand-up comedian, just a super guy. But I don't know if you guys ever have heard him talk about his heritage and his legacy. He actually is from South Africa during apartheid and is from a mixed race family, and so his very existence was illegal. I highly would recommend you go and listen to some of his talks on this subject. There's several things on YouTube where you can find him talking about his early life in apartheid South Africa. It was a criminal offense to marry or have a relationship with someone not of the same racial group, no matter what race you were. It was also racial discrimination. The education was segregated. Now, this here is the thing that is probably the most outrageous to me, is that if you were black, you couldn't study things and have the same opportunities to look forward to as whites. You had to literally learn how to do like chore type work in school, which I just find to be just despicable. And similar things like that happened in Jim Crow, which was supposed to be separate but equal. But I mean, we know that it was not equal by any stretch. But the policy wasn't even designed to be equal here. It was straight up designed to keep people of certain ethnicities in certain roles, almost like a structured caste system. Black people were forcibly moved from their homes in cities to live in other parts of the country where white people didn't want to live, and so the good land, the places that were places that were designated to whites, and then trains, hospitals, and ambulances were also segregated and not equal, and black people were not allowed to run businesses or employ white people in businesses that in any kind of business capacity. So you can see there's a lot of, it's not equal by any stretch, and it's just so backwards, all right? Nelson Mandela was a leading advocate for the equality in South Africa, for I guess the movement for blacks to not have to live differently than whites. And he became South Africa's first democratically elected president. He won the Nobel Peace Prize in 1993. Now, it's also important to say that Nelson Mandela, because of his efforts, during the time that he was fighting for the rights of blacks in South Africa, he was arrested and held in jail for decades. I want to say it was close to 30 years off the top of my head before he was released, and then becomes the first democratically elected president of South Africa. There's a lot of good documentaries, a lot of good YouTube videos on this subject as well if you want more depth than what we're able to go in right now. And the legacy of apartheid, just like the legacy of Jim Crow in the United States, still endures today in South Africa. We are still trying to recover from the racial disparities that we brought on ourselves in our own history, and South Africa is certainly no different. In fact, their apartheid movement lasted way longer than the Jim Crow movement did in practice. What we all have to do now is figure out how we can look beyond the color of our skin and move forward into a future where everyone gets the same degree of opportunity and lives the same degree of equally prosperous lives. The other thing we want to talk about in this video, just to go ahead and knock it out, is the Balkans. And I've called this the Balkanization of the Balkans, trying to be cute, but this word Balkanization actually emerged due to the fact that the Balkans are like a powder keg of ethnic diversity. And so again, when we talk about the Balkan Peninsula or the Balkan region, we're looking at this area where Greece is. So I always say that because Greece, which is right here where I just colored in black, Greece, we all kind of know about the ancient Greeks, and we've studied that, and so I always use that as a good way of being able to quickly identify where the Balkan region is. But we know it's these people that live in Slovenia, they are they're their own ethnic group. The people that live in Croatia, they're Croats, they're their own ethnic group, and so on. Bosnians are their own ethnic group. The people of Serbia. That's a cool color right there, isn't it? I don't know if I've used. I guess my daughter put that here. And I actually accidentally covered up Kosovo. Kosovo is made up of Kosovar Albanians, which are a different ethnic group. The Macedonians, that's a big one. What else have I got here? The people of Vojvodina and Montenegro. And there are a lot of Serbs, for example, living in all of these areas. There's a lot of Croats. I mean, they don't all live exactly by the lines drawn between the political regions, but more or less, the majority of these people in here align with their ethnic identity, and they don't want to be controlled under the same government as some of these other ethnic groups. And so this points right there fundamentally to the problem that we're looking at in this powder keg region. And the Balkans, we've already talked about this region in previous videos. The ethnic struggles here are what led to, more or less, World War I with the assassination of the Austrian Archduke by a Serbian nationalist. And at the time, this area, Serbia, this area was under the influence, they were under control of the Austro-Hungarian Empire. So, fast forward to the mid-1900s and late 1900s, Yugoslavia was an independent communist country. What I mean by that is that they weren't controlled by the Soviet Union like the other communist states in Eastern Europe were. They were their own thing. And under the leadership of Josip Broz Tito, which I'm sure I just said that really wrong, he was able to keep all these ethnic groups in check. Because remember, if you're a strong communist leader, communism means everyone is going to be part of the workers' problem. They're not going to be Macedonians or Kosovar Albanians or Serbs or Croats or any of that stuff. So he kept them under his tight control, under his communist government. But in 1980, he died, And what happens here is that regional leaders begin to emerge, and they represented the interests of the various ethnic groups of the areas where they were in power. And so these different regions started to vie for power and started to seek their own autonomous governments. And so nationalism starts to resurface, probably because the economy tanked in Yugoslavia as a whole. And so you start to see these different countries try to separate and become their own thing. And so let's talk about this guy, Slobodan Milošević. He was a Serbian hero. He appealed to Serbians who felt threatened by other national groups. And here's the guy right here, all right, Slobodan Milošević. Now, if you look up here, Serbia is all this area that I'm kind of highlighting here in my black pen. And notice that Serbia includes Montenegro, Vojvodina, which is, where am I? I'm not seeing it, so I'm just going to kind of guess that it's this region right here. And Kosovo. I missed it, but I'm going to just go ahead and do that. So all these different areas belong to Serbia. But if you notice the ethnic layout here, what do you notice about all this? There's a heck of a lot of Serbs living in Bosnia and Croatia. Well, we talked a little bit about the geographic concept of irredentism a few videos ago. And what we're going to start seeing here is that in areas with large numbers of Serbs living as minorities, the Croatians, the Serbians under this guy, Slobodan Milošević, felt like it was their destiny and their obligation to control that land, and they wanted to establish what they called a greater Serbia. Now, if this sounds a lot like what Hitler was doing with his Lebensraum and his Aryan state, his German expansion, his organic theory politics, it's very similar. Yes, this is very similar to what Hitler wanted to do. And so he starts going in and supporting rebel groups of Serbs in these different places in Bosnia and Croatia, in an effort to bring them in as part of his greater Serbia. And so Serbs in Bosnia declared independence from Bosnia and were supported by Serbia. At the same time, you've got Serbs in Croatia doing that same thing, but then Croatia also is picking on Bosnia because, look, there's a lot of Croatians living in here as well. And so Croatia and Serbia both kind of go into Bosnia, where the Bosnians are Muslims, and they start to attack and destroy and kill, even if they're unarmed. They take villages of people and they start to try to kill them, rape them, burn their stuff down, run them out of the land. And in 1994, due to NATO influence, Croatia stopped all of their aggression and all of their fighting. And in 1995, NATO actually intervened in Bosnia to stop the Serbs. But it didn't stop the whole conflict. It just stopped that fighting right there in Bosnia. Now, there's a lot here that I'm skipping. But in the peace agreements between these countries here, Serbia and Croatia, way more than Bosnia, were kind of rewarded for their efforts. I mean, Bosnia was the one that really lost. They lost the most people due to ethnic cleansing. We're going to talk more about that at the end. They also lost territory as a result of this. But in the late 1990s, even after all this happened, Kosovo, which was made up of Kosovar Albanians, not Serbs, but is controlled by Serbia, they sought their own independence and wanted to be independent, or they were an autonomous region. They wanted to be more autonomous and independent from Serbia, and Serbia wanted to kind of reel them back in. All right, and so what happens here is Serbia goes in and responds forcefully against Kosovo's efforts to become an autonomous country, and the West intervened and defeated Serbia because they were doing outrageous stuff like ethnic cleansing in Kosovo. And so the NATO kind of occupies and has a military presence in Kosovo for the majority of the early 2000s. And Russia was kind of concerned about this because Russia is going to, and China both, stand up very strongly for a country's sovereignty no matter what. They're never going to say it's okay for someone like the Western powers to go in and decide who gets to control who on the basis of their kind of government. All right, and so in 2008, one of the things that Vladimir Putin feared was that when that NATO was going to try to usher in an independence for Kosovo, and in 2008, actually Kosovo did declare their own independence, but because Russia and China both are permanent members of the UN Security Council, this was not and will never be recognized as a independent state. So on any map that you see that shows the countries of the world political map, you ought to see Kosovo included as part of Serbia. I'm not going to say you always will, but indeed, it is not a recognized state. Now, as fate would have it, later on in 2014, what the Russians more or less did with Crimea is extremely similar to what NATO did with Kosovo in this regard. It's not the same, but it's very, very similar to those. So these examples here with the Serbs and the Croats going after the Bosnian Muslims, and this, I mentioned this term ethnic cleansing, and also you saw ethnic cleansing in Kosovo against the Kosovar Albanians. This is not the same as a definition of genocide. So genocide, we've already talked about. Genocide, I'm just going to write it out here, is the systematic killing of a group on the basis of whatever difference it is they have. So you're trying to completely eradicate that particular group from the earth by killing them. Okay, ethnic cleansing. So I'm just going to write I'll write it out. Ethnic cleansing. Okay, is kind of the concept of trying to remove. All right, now I've got it written up here. The removal. Okay, removal of that group, and that can include killing, killing. All right, but there's also going to be other tactics that are involved there as well that don't necessarily that result in the death. So burning of towns, raping and pillaging. I'm not trying to say that one is any better or worse than another. They're both completely atrocious, but there is a different definition that on a world political spectrum would bring in a different result due to the UN Charter. So I just wanted to make sure I made that distinction here, that we are not looking at a defined genocide in Yugoslavia. It is an example of ethnic cleansing. There's plenty of other examples of genocide, like in Rwanda, for example. But this is not one of those. And so I know I went a little long on this video because I covered a lot of content, but thank you for watching, and I will see you guys in the last video of my world history.